Good evening. We're going to begin the meeting at this time. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, if everyone could stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. Welcome to the second meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education. At this time, I'm just going to direct the board members to the minutes from the prior meeting, and if there is any objection, please let me know, but I would entertain a motion to adopt the minutes into our record. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. At this time, the minutes from the February 27th meeting have been adopted. I want to offer an opportunity just for any board members who wish to make any remarks generally to make those remarks at this time. Mr. Mayor?
Just at the outset, I think that one of the things that I've been hearing about was about making sure that we have public comment, and I'm glad to see it on the agenda, but more importantly that it happened at the beginning of the meeting, and so I was hoping to make a motion that we move, even starting at this meeting, Mr. Chair, the public comment to the front of the agenda after the adoption of the minutes, so that we could get that the public comment in and out of the way, but to use what we use at the school committee and also at the city council in Lawrence, which is the 2-minute rule, not addressing yourself. You can address only the body and not any individual, and that no one from the board can reply or make comment after. But that we do that for starting at this meeting, move the public comment from number 8 on the agenda to number 3.
I appreciate those comments and that motion from the mayor. So if we can take that in 2 pieces. I actually have a copy here of the school committee policy on public participation, and I'll distribute those. And per the mayor's suggestion, he has provided this. And the motion from the mayor would be to adopt the school committee's current public participation procedure. So if you are a Lawrence resident, you would be familiar with this as the public comment procedure of the school committee, and we can, at this time, entertain a motion from the mayor to adopt this policy as our public comment policy. Would I have a second, or would I have a motion for that? Well, we have a motion for that from the mayor. Would I have a second on that?
Motion to approve mayor's suggestion, and also to include the public participation by the used by the school committee.
Thank you. All those in favor at this time?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Mayor. So we have officially adopted that. To the mayor's second motion, which I appreciate, to move public comment to the front of the agenda. And I assume, Mr. Mayor, going forward, that we do that at all meetings. We take public comment first.
Correct.
The mayor has moved to make that part of the official policy. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. So we thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this point, the LAE has now adopted the public comment policy. That is also the policy of the school committee, and from this point forward, we will take public comment at the beginning of the agenda. I don't know if this time, if we have anyone signed up for public comment. So, okay, if you wish to sign up, please come on up.
And this, the other part of the, just through you, Mr. Chair, the other part of the policy is that we always do name and address for the record and that type of stuff. 2 minutes, 1.5 minute
Get a
warning.
bell. Okay, I'll do,
I do that the other one, I could do this one for you.
do they state their, name on this speech?
Yeah, name and address for the record.
Thank you. If you wouldn't mind stating your name and address, and you may well be familiar with the policy of the school committee, but, so you'll have 2 minutes, and at 90 seconds, you'll get a bell to indicate that you have 30 seconds left. Thank you.
Thanks. Sebastian Brown, 18 Yale Street, Lawrence. Yeah, becoming more familiar. I feel like I've been starting to make this like a regular practice. Come to these, feeling less and less nervous. Nice to see Raquel. Can't shout out to y'all, but we can shout out to community members. So I know part of last time I was at last meeting, and one important thing y'all were talking about was like the effort to try to be intentional to get the word out. And I know a couple of y'all, I don't know if you had the meeting, but I think that's a really important part of this whole process, to make this as community, to have the community engaged in as much as possible. We have had the school committee meetings over the last 2 months that obviously Mayor and others have been to, that and Pat, where we've had for the first time, last time it was about 50, and the time before that about 70 people come to those, which was awesome, and Raquel was there. And then, so I mean, explosion in terms of like interest and engagement, and as you know, these are pretty boring meetings, but still people who want to, just in general, these sort of meetings are kind of boring. That's just how they are, these like parliamentary kind of meetings, but trying to make them relevant for people. And so having like 20 people speak up in public participation and just starting to like flex that muscle, I think is something that we all, whatever people are saying, I think we all think our community is going to benefit with more people flexing that muscle and having a stronger muscle to be able to say what's on their mind. For a lot of us, I kind of represent myself as a community member. Used to work at Lawrence Community Works doing organizing in the schools. Did some work with 1647 in the schools, but then now really just a resident and also kind of co-moderator of this campaign called Our Future, Our Schools, really just focused on that, trying to get community more involved in the process, and really focus on how do we start to see y'all's main role, the way that I feel like when we look at the history of Lawrence, that y'all can, education Lawrence, that y'all can be seen as a crucial moment of leading the transition plan out of receivership. So how can this board be a partner with the school committee to lead us out of receivership? And there are a lot of willing people to be part of that plan, that process. Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have anyone else for public comment at this time? I don't see. Okay. Thank you for those remarks. Do we have any board members at this time who want to offer any other opening remarks? So obviously will be, we hope, a lot of comments and questions as we take up the business. No? Okay. Great. Just as far as report of the chair goes, I think most of what I hope to report on will be taken up through the agenda that we've already established. The one thing that I just wish to mention for the record, though I know everybody is well aware of this, is that Jeff Riley has transitioned from his superintendent role, designating Dr. Mary Lou Bergeron as acting superintendent. We're very pleased that Dr. Bergeron joins us tonight. I just want to recognize her, and I know she's no stranger to the folks in this room and to folks in Lawrence Public Schools, and has been incredibly dedicated to LPS for the bulk of her career, and we know that LPS is in good hands with Dr. Bergeron as acting superintendent. I just, again, for the record, I know people are aware, but just to be abundantly clear, while Jeff Riley has vacated the role of superintendent and designated Dr. Bergeron acting superintendent, he remains receiver presently, and I do believe, in short time, we will have clarification on exactly when this board will assume the role of receiver formally. And I would just remind everyone that at this time, we are charged only with overseeing the search for the next superintendent. My last piece of business is just per authority of the chair designated in the bylaws. I have designated Kate Cook as counsel to the Lawrence Alliance for Education. Kate joins us tonight, but just for complete understanding, because the Lawrence Alliance for Education is a nonprofit board, it is not represented by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education or the Lawrence Public Schools on a legal, in terms of a legal basis. Counsel for LPS and counsel for DESE would not be responsible for providing legal guidance to the board. They may choose to do so at their discretion, but it does not cover the representation that the board is entitled to as its own standalone entity. So I think at some point in the future, Kate will address the board, but I can just say that she has incredible depth of experience in education law, in government law, and has most recently represented the Springfield Empowerment Zone, which is a strong parallel to the Lawrence Alliance for Education. So with that, I will move to committee updates. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Just a couple quick questions. So the current receiver and superintendent will be the new DESE commissioner as of tomorrow. So it'll be the first time in the receivership that the commissioner of DESE will also be the receiver. So that, just so to put it in like hierarchically, people can understand that although Jeff is currently the receiver and superintendent, tomorrow or Wednesday, whatever it is, he'll be receiver and DESE commissioner until we get a superintendent, until we get the full powers as receiver.
Yes, and that is at soon-to-be Commissioner Riley's discretion as to when that transition happens. And so I think we are just awaiting word on that and understand and respect that Mr. Riley has a lot on his plate right now. But yeah, we will see that, clarified, I think, in due time. And I can just say that, there are receiverships in Holyoke and Southbridge currently, and they have at differing periods had either a DESE commissioner or a DESE assistant commissioner serve as receiver for interim periods. But I assume the transition will happen in short order. I think we know the original date was intended to be July 1st, but again, I don't have any official knowledge on this, but I think we can infer from Mr. Riley's accelerated timetable that the transition will happen sooner than originally anticipated.
Great. I just want to make sure that was clear about the hierarchical piece of it. And then the second one is Ms. Cook is going to be our attorney, not DESE's attorney,
Right.
not LPS attorney, the attorney for this board.
Yep. So for instance, we will have to take up with DESE a memorandum of understanding that spells out the sort of delineation of powers between this board and DESE. And this is something that Ms. Cook would be retained to help negotiate. But to be clear, like this memorandum, when we take it up, will be circulated to members of the board for their review, get their questions, their input, but also to know that Ms. Cook is there to provide advice relative to whatever issues may be encountered related to the memorandum. But that would be a classic case where DESE may have a point of view, and this board may feel differently. And Ms. Cook would be in place to just advise us on that. I think we will also have to address Mr. Rodriguez having to recuse himself at certain points in some of those discussions, whether that's appropriate or not. And not because we don't trust Mr. Rodriguez's judgment, but because he's an employee of DESI in addition to serving on this board. My hope, obviously, is that there will be a spirit of cooperation in all of this, but it is wise to make sure that we have our own legal counsel as we move forward.
John?
Yes?
Who's paying the lawyer?
Yep, so ultimately, the way this has worked, including while LPS has been in receivership, is that LPS picks up the charges on this. So that would be a cost that falls under LPS. And I'll get full information on what that budget would look like. I hope that we do not find ourselves in any prolonged legal entanglements, but ultimately the budget would go to LPS.
Okay, and this
via
is
DESI.
an expense that isn't currently budgeted, so is there's some reconciliation that's
Well,
going to
this
take
would
place
fall
with it?
under the current procedure where the district, where DESI reconciles costs that they incur
Okay,
in the receiver role
okay.
to LPS. So it falls under that portion of the budget. I don't have a sophisticated level of detail on that yet. In terms of precise figures, I will get that for the next meeting. That's a great point that you raised. But suffice to say, currently, when DESI incurs costs, such as hiring a search firm, those are ultimately charged back to the LPS district.
Right.
The council would work the same way.
Okay. One more question. So this agreement process, this negotiation process where we're going to figure out what powers inhere in this board and what powers DESI retains for itself, who's involved in that conversation? Is that between you and DESI? Is that between all of us and DESI? How is that going to play out?
Yeah, ultimately, that falls to my discretion, but what I would like to do is make sure that we solicit the full input of the board on the key issues, and then work collectively to give Ms. Cook instructions in negotiating that, and then ultimately bring back a final memorandum for review by the board, and then enter into that memorandum.
And just so we don't have to get into a large discussion around this now, but I'm uncertain about what our leverage is in that discussion, right? Like, we may say to DESI, we think we should have these powers, and if DESI doesn't agree, is that truly a point of negotiation between the lawyers, or is it?
I don't think I can answer that. But I would say certainly the receivership law, I believe, strongly favors DESI, but I think DESI has demonstrated an interest in having a strong Lawrence representation on this board that I would presume they want. Pleased with the memorandum, and I guess the ultimate leverage would have to reside somewhere in that. I don't know the weight of that ultimately, though.
Okay.
John?
Julia?
I would anticipate, based on Jess's comments, that based on the receivership laws, there had to be a memorandum of understanding between the current receiver and DESI.
Yes.
And some of that will probably flow over to this board.
Yes.
Okay, just
Yeah, no, very valid point.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Other questions on that? Okay. At this point, I'm going to ask our subcommittees to report out and take any votes if needed. Turn it over to Jess Anders for a report from the Outreach Committee.
Okay, great. So Pat Mariano and Noemi Custodia Laura and I met a few weeks ago to go over what we might consider to be a a better and more transparent and more inclusive notice process so that there can be participation at these meetings. And there's a list of a report that some notes that we made from that will be included, I'm sure, in the minutes for this meeting. But just to briefly go over them, so the points that we wanted to emphasize were to choose a regular meeting date, which several other people on the committee have also mentioned, so that that can be widely publicized and consistently known. We wanted to be able to create a simple Facebook page where the information from the meetings could be posted, announcements, agendas, minutes. However, we didn't feel like we would have the capacity as a group to kind of monitor that page and respond to comment on it. So we wanted it to be a method of pushing information out there, and then also have on that page a procedure for very clearly outlining the process by which community members could come to meetings and participate for public comment or get items on the agenda or advocate for items to be on the agenda. We also thought that if it's possible to open a WhatsApp account and use it in a similar manner, that would be great, because there are parents and students in the district who that might be the most familiar way for them to get information. We think the minutes and agendas should be posted on the LPS website and the City of Lawrence website, or at least links to them provided. And we also wanted to utilize the We Are Lawrence website, which is a kind of community clearinghouse for information, to post those things, especially the notice of meetings. And I would say the final couple of things are, we need to compile a list of media context, and we're trying to be very inclusive in that. So we said, you know, the Eagle Tribune, Rumbo, the Valley Patriot, and Spanish language radio shows being kind of the major ways that people get information here. We thought El Mundo and El Planeta might not have as wide a circulation, but we can include those if we need to. And then also create an email listserv of community-based organizations that would include youth-serving organizations, churches, the Mayor's Health Task Force, the ESOL Task Force, neighborhood associations, the health clinic, and any other nonprofits that are working with the school system, just to be able to, you know, for each meeting, to just email out the meeting notice and agenda so that people are aware of it and they can post it and distribute it among their constituents. What we wanted to discuss a little bit this evening is who does that, because I don't think, you know, we didn't do that for this meeting because we wanted to discuss it with the full committee first, and we were also uncertain of kind of the mechanism for doing that, and felt like if it came from any one of us on the board, then it seems kind of strange rather than having it be like an official communication. So we need to discuss what, I know that Joan is the awesome administrative support to this board, and I I'm wondering if this kind of properly falls under something we can work with Joan on, but we don't know whether we can put like creating a Facebook page on Joan's plate, and so we need to figure out what resources we might need to just get some of this off the ground. I don't think it will require a lot to keep it going, but we need to dedicate a little bit of time and energy to creating the listserv, getting the contact list, getting a simple page up and going, et cetera. So I don't know if Pat and I don't think, is Noemi here?
Noemi's not here.
Yeah, okay.
No.
Pat, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, we did talk about the Family Resource Center being the main spot where the information could be disseminated because of their listserv and their connections with the different groups in the community. So perhaps, rather than Joan, perhaps somebody from the Family Resource Center could be assigned to create this Facebook page or help us get this information out to the community.
I did have a conversation with some of the Family Resource Center staff, and they expressed a deep desire to be helpful, but would also appreciate the support from Joan in some of the administrative end of it. So I'm not sure where we land on all of this, and if other board members have some ideas around that.
If it's okay with the subcommittee, I would recommend that we have a conversation with Joan this week or next to assess capacity there. And if the capacity is not there, because we know Joan has a full plate, but may well have some bandwidth there. But if not, that we then explore some other avenues, but try to bring this to a resolution that we feel will work before our next meeting. Would that, is that acceptable?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is maybe a couple of things like I think the email listserv might already exist in almost the form that we need it to through the Family Resource Center. So at the very least, even if we don't have a Facebook page up by the next meeting, let's try and get the meeting notice out through, maybe through the Family Resource Center, while we also talk with Joan and assess, so that we at least are starting to get the word out more widely.
That's great. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So, Mr. Chair, I just, first of all, thanks to the subcommittee for the work they did. This is, truly thorough, and I feel like you're hitting all the important pieces of it. I would make a comment to ensure we do add El Mundo. They're, I think some of the local papers don't hit every bodega, and for some reason El Mundo is at every bodega. And so that's the only thing I would say that. And then, the listserv is, you think you're just you're hitting all the nonprofits and all that, but really there's a lot of parents in these organizations that work for DTA, they work for, Justice organization, so you're gonna actually hit a lot of parents too. And I would just encourage you to have the conversation, not only with Joan. I know that Superintendent Riley is leaving as of tomorrow, but the interim acting superintendent, she might have some ideas about how we get it done too, as far as people's workload is concerned. It's always nice to have the superintendent say, do it.
Just, do you want to follow up on the email listserv piece, or do you want me to do that?
I can do that part of it for sure, yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other comments, questions, or any other pieces on this? Julia?
I just want to suggest that since this board is still not duly appointed, that we still might have some time to work on some of these details, and that hopefully we can have all of this set up by the time the board is duly appointed. That way we're not putting more work on our shoulders or on other people's shoulders than we have to.
Point well taken. Great. I want to thank the subcommittee too for their work on this, and for the thorough report back. And I think we'll move this to as speedy a resolution as possible, recognizing that we want to make sure that we get word out to all corners of the community, and are really in making sure that the community knows what we're doing when. Yes.
Just one last comment or question on item number 1 regarding the dates for the board meeting.
Yeah.
Should we proceed with this, or should we discuss it in a separate line item in terms of the dates?
I think it would be great to nail that down tonight.
For the next board meeting?
Well, no,
I'm
for
sorry.
the regularity of it, because I know
Yeah,
that
no,
some of
that
us
is-
have not responded
yeah,
to Joan yet.
that-
She's been
yeah,
trying to corral us.
That is
but,
my
yeah.
that is my last piece tonight, and
Okay.
I am not so unwise as to chastise the board, but that is my number one question to Joan each time we email and communicate. Has the board responded yet? All right. So with that said, I am going to ask Ventura Rodriguez, before we bring the search up, if he could report generally on the outreach and community process that has taken place relative to the superintendent search, and that we will hear from the search firm directly. Ventura?
Sure. Thanks, Chair. So I had the pleasure of helping to organize the community engagement process for the feedback, which we know was probably the most critical part of the superintendent search process, to make sure that though we as a department, putting on one of my hats, working for the department, we secured a vendor to try to make sure that we were ready, this board was ready to move forward with the search, but the job description that was put out, we knew was meant as a placeholder, described the work to date, but we really wanted to ensure that there was a robust community engagement process such that we could get a really detailed set of information around Lawrence specifically, really focused on what are the skills, habits, attitudes that we're hearing from different stakeholders in the community that we need to ensure that the next superintendent has. So, I was really, really lucky that members of this board stepped up very quickly to help out with suggestions around people to speak with, about, venues to hold meetings, email contacts, Jess, the mayor. I mean, so many people we were back and forth on emails, like, at all hours of the night, just making sure that we were identifying individuals, groups, venues that we absolutely had to include in this process. And then I just want to make sure that I highlight also Denise Snyder's work in this and her team. Denise took what was a lot of information and ideas from members of this board and put together what I thought was just really an excellent representative stakeholder process that, we'll hear a lot of information about, but just really led the effort to be really thoughtful and intentional about having multiple opportunities for different stakeholders to participate, having translation, having daycare, having food, spreading, the sessions throughout different locations. So, with the help of Denise and her staff and members of this board, we put together what I think was a really robust process, and obviously always open to feedback on that. But I'm really excited to hear from our search firm this evening about the findings, because at the end of the day, this is what's really going to guide the search moving forward, the really Lawrence-specific information that we're hearing from our stakeholders. That's now what will be used to disseminate to potential candidates, but also to start looking at the individuals that we have in the pipeline as well. So thank you.
I want to thank you and all the members of the board who helped organize a robust process on a very, very short time frame. And I want to thank Denise and her team for running all of the logistics again on a very short time frame. Greatly appreciate that.
Chair, can I just say one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, and just explicitly to say it too, incredible turnout, and really appreciate, this happened also between snow days, so there had to be some cancellations, and just the number of community members who participated and came in. So I'm not telling anything new to anyone in this room, but just the level of commitment and passion, and participation. This was just another example of it. So I was really privileged to be a part of this, and it just shone through, once again. So it was great.
Thank you, and great point on the weather too. All right, so at this time I'm going to ask the search firm to present to us relative to the process that has taken place and the profile they have sort of developed on that. And then at that time, we'll welcome questions from the board. And then we will talk a little bit about time frame and then talk about the hiring process going forward. But so at this time, I'll turn it over to the search firm, to Dwight and Don, and if you can introduce yourselves, not just for the board, but for the thousands of people in attendance, that would be great. Thank you.
I always have to remember to turn on my mic as well. Thank you again. HYA, Hazard Youngtea, is a search firm located in Schaumburg, Illinois. They do national searches, have for some time, for superintendents in particular and other administrative positions. I have never been to Schaumburg, Illinois, and that's a home office for us, and I work mostly in the East. So by way of introduction for me, I've been involved in about 25 superintendent searches for HYA over the past 3 or 4 years. Some of them have been urban districts, some have been suburban. They range in size from 500 students to 38,000 students. Currently working on the search in Newark, New Jersey, have worked in Providence, Rhode Island, Manchester, New Hampshire, Stamford, Connecticut, either being the lead or the partner in those searches. I come from an educational background. I had 40 years in education between teaching and administration. I was a superintendent in 3 districts in New Jersey, 1 district in Pennsylvania, and for the years 2002 through 2005, I was Deputy Commissioner of Education in New Jersey. I say that for 2 reasons. Number one, so that you know we have some background going into these searches and know about hiring practices and what districts are looking for and enjoy the work. And number 2, so you know I'm old and I've been around for a while and I still love the work. So with that, I'll let Don say a little bit about himself, and then Don will go right into the process that we're using, and we'll pick it up in different pieces from there.
Thank you, Dwight. My name is Don Macrino. I am one of the associates who spent 3 quite delightful days in Lawrence working with the focus groups. I've been an educator for 45 years. I continue to serve as a headmaster at a school in Connecticut. I, too, have done a number of searches for HYA, including the Fenway School in Boston. We just completed a search in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to your south. Franklin, Lexington, Woodbridge, Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, to mention a few. I would just like to talk a little bit about the process. I'll give an overview, and certainly if there are any questions along the way, I'd be more than happy, Dwight or I would be happy to answer those questions. But maybe before I start, I would just like to extend a real thank you to the community. We've both done a lot of searches. When I said 3 delightful days, I meant it. I really got to know Lawrence, and I was very pleasantly surprised by the passion of the citizenry for the young students, children, and young adults who attend school in this district, and the very distinct desire to continue the progress that the city has seen. It's a complex city. It's a city with challenges, but with the citizens you have and the desire they have to see it improve, I think you're certainly on the right road. So thank you, and thank you to all of those who participated in both the focus groups and the online survey. The focus groups, as I said, there were 2 associates. We met for full days and into the evening each of the 3 days. We met with more than 271 members of the community. Among those were students, parents, teachers, central office staff, other staff members at the school, and community members, to mention a few of the groups. In the focus groups, we asked essentially 3 questions, and I won't read the questions directly, but they asked what the strengths of the school district were, what were the challenges that are here presently and lie ahead for the near future, and finally, what were the personal and professional characteristics that you were looking for in the next leader of the Lawrence Public Schools. With that data and the data that we received from the survey, which the electronic survey, there were 219 respondents to that. 271 individuals responded in the focus groups. From all of those data points, we create a leadership profile, which will be reviewed tonight. And from that, we also take a conglomeration of what you have told us and come up with the desired characteristics for the next leader. So what has been put together is actually the voice of Lawrence from all of the constituents that we spoke with. You won't necessarily see every single comment that was made, but as trends emerged, we captured those, and we captured the voice as accurately as we possibly could. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dwight.
I'm going to address the first 6 pages of the report, which is the executive summary. And again, the executive summary is designed to put in a somewhat of a historical perspective where we are, and then some talk about what were the most prominent themes that were brought out between the focus groups and the survey. And I might add that, and it's been said, on the dais as well, that, through some of those weather days, rescheduling those meetings, it did go like clockwork, and that does not happen everywhere. And we're very thankful for that. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just wanted to, because I thought there was a heavy lift getting all those things done, and so, thank you that you were able to do it, and of course, I think the community responded as best they could given the circumstances. But I know that somebody asked me, I didn't see you there. I just want to be clear that for the most part, we were asked to stay away, so people felt like they could just, be open about it. So if you didn't see the members of the board there, it wasn't because we were disinterested. We wanted to make sure that the process was not, nobody was putting a thumb on the scale. People felt like they couldn't talk openly. So I'm glad it got done, and it got done thoroughly. I mean, looking at the responses now that we have here in the deck, and it looks like it was all the right people got the comments in, so I'm excited about it.
In the beginning portion of any profile that we do, we try to capture the historical context of the area. If you just do a straight history, as if you were teaching American history, that's complicated in and of itself to begin with. So we try to stick with the kind of the school status history. And in Lawrence, that's pretty complicated too, as you look over the last several years and the kind of governance you've had and being in receivership. But you're also not the first district with whom we've worked that has been through that kind of experience. So we just try to at least make sure, and I'm not going to read that word for word, that puts into context where you are right now and what you hope to do in terms of, that leadership process. A lot of that discussion already happened tonight. You're still defining some of that with the board that's present, and certainly you've had a receiver for the past several years. And so that too, when we reach out to people with whom to speak, I also did speak with Mr. Riley. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that, because I thought that was important to do as well. And I did catch him today on his way to his new position, I think, for about a half an hour. The first page, again, gives that brief history and talks about, the new board that will come into play the role of receiver for the district. We do put a paragraph in that's in there on page 2. This is a report that presents the findings of the people with whom we spoke. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything that everybody said was true, but it does mean that that's either their perception or their belief. And while we try to be as candid as possible in those summaries that follow in that portion of the leadership profile, we don't put comments in there that are negative or cause concern for this board or the school committee or the school district as a whole. But we make sure that the points are made about where the concerns are. You see a chart there on page 3 that is what Don was talking about, the participants. Now, you'll see on the left side the way that the groups are broken down. Some of them are combined because when we did the survey, there were actually only about 7 groups, but when we did the actual interviews with the focus groups on the ground, there were far more than 7 groups, so we've combined some together. That also, like any other community, if you only had 2 participants in one group, those who are familiar with the community could pretty much identify who said what. And it doesn't matter the size of a school district. I think that's pretty true in most places. So we do combine some of those. The part of the report, too, is the survey that was taken, those survey results, and the open-ended comments. And there is a question that also says, do you have any suggestions on who you'd like to see be the superintendent? And the only comment I'll make on that is, typically with boards, we tell them, that's not for public consumption because of confidentiality rules and and legal counsel most always advises that. So if there is to be something publicly released, it's usually the executive summary and the comments that follow that were given by the general public. When you get to page 4, again, these were the most common trends that were found to be strengths of the district. And we keep that to, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs. And if you go through the groups and the data that follows, you see a lot of detail that supports that. But the largest strength of the district now that came out, and again, we don't rank them 1, 2, 3, but one of the largest was the dedication to continuous improvement under receivership. If you followed takeover across the country over the last several years, there aren't many places where it's working, period. And I think here it's working. Progress has been made, and how the district moves forward will certainly be very important in terms of how the students will be treated and prepare, and what will prepare them for a future that is certainly far more complex than it may have even been 10 years ago. So we did talk about that a little bit. And while the superintendent was seen as one of the key reasons, because of the way he led the organization itself is cited, and the people that work within it, and their dedication to kids. I don't think there was any portion of this report, whether it be a strength, a challenge, or eventually getting to the characteristics that that the participants would like to see in a new superintendent, that left out talking about kids. And I will tell you, too, that sometimes that doesn't happen with every group. And I think that's extremely important, because that's a huge concern, and it's evident from everything we looked at. The Family Resource Center is seen as one of the brightest spots in the school district. And when you look at the work of the Family Resource Center, and even if you just look at their webpage and break it down to all the things they do, you hear a lot, especially in cities that may have experienced some poverty issues and services issues, that these kinds of services are not easily established. And the Family Resource Center certainly not only helped with that, but it played an active role, but it's helped a great many citizens. And there was a lot of comment about that. And the key services, I mean, the range is incredible. And you know what it is personally. Some of you work with it personally. It can range from school registration to helping people find work and dealing with some housing issues. And again, in the last paragraph on the strengths, we put in about the appreciation for the teachers who have remained dedicated to the students in Lawrence. And I think that's important, too, because, it seems that school districts that are experiencing some difficulty or may find themselves in conditions like receivership have an abandonment of the district sometimes. You'll see people leaving. Professionals say, well, I think it's maybe it's just going to be too much to continue here without the right resources. But here, it appeared from the comments that we got that a number of excellent teachers have stayed, a number of new teachers have come on board that reflect the movement forward. A lot of that's due to the leadership that's here, but also, I can remember a long time ago, and I believe it happened in Compton, California, and there was a gentleman named, I think his name was Randolph Ward, and he was a takeover superintendent, and he said you cannot begin to address takeover unless you build capacity within. It's an easy thing to come in and say you'll just fire everybody and replace everybody and the world will change. But the real challenge is, can you take the people who may not have had the kinds of experience they may have needed at one point and then give that to them in terms of professional development and leadership and lead them on the right path? And I think the general feeling here has been that that right path has been established. And that doesn't mean people haven't left, and it doesn't mean that people may not have been asked to leave, but it does mean that there's a strong core of people who remain dedicated to Lawrence. In terms of the challenges facing the district, when districts go through change, I don't know how many books are written on change, my word, thousands, and how change takes place and how it affects different people is certainly something that people need to be concerned about, and that people need to make sure that the plan is well established, that there's a vision involved with that, and in moving forward, you're hearing a little bit of that again, from the board tonight. You've certainly seen it in the past, and you're going through another kind of change. It'll be, the district will still be in receivership, but it's a different kind of receivership. And now you'll have more people and hopefully more people involved, and people seem to see that as a concern, not a concern that it won't work, but a concern that it's a change. And then and how's the district going to face that and evolve through that change? Now, I would tell you, and I don't know the politics of Massachusetts. I mean, I was a deputy commissioner in New Jersey, so I do know there is politics in education. Now, but in seeing that, it cannot be detrimental to Lawrence to have the commissioner come from Lawrence. So I think that's going to be something that works well for you going forward in terms of support. It doesn't mean special support, but it means overall support and a continuation of moving forward. But the transition is seen as a challenge. The challenge of any school district is to remain student-centered. It's easy to get lost in the mire of, oh, wow, you can call it minutia, you can call it, some of the day-to-day operations may not seem to be so important, but they are very important to students. And it's important, and people kept talking about that. Let's keep focused on our students. We want them to do well. We have had students now be representative of the kind of things we would like to see them get involved in, the kinds of careers they may be exposed to, the different kinds of opportunities they may have within the district. And a challenge for every district, which probably ties more to that last paragraph as well, is how are you going to keep those things available for kids? When we talk about, and I'll throw in the financial, because that's the last paragraph there, financial concerns are always there. And it's easy for people to say, well, you can get a lot of grants and do things, but grants have lifetimes. And when they go away, the question is, how do you sustain programs and make sure that kids are getting the benefits of what may be some of those grants and financial attributes, and yet keep them open to a broad range of things? Now, from what I've read about the receivership up to this point is, some things that had either dissipated or not been played up as much as they had been in the past have been brought back kind of gradually, and that's going to have to continue. Whether they be programs in the arts, whether they be programs that prepare students better for careers in the future, that there's a balance to it, and it's not kind of one-sided, but that, that concern remains there. The country hasn't figured out how to fund education yet. So it's not going to be strange for Lawrence or any other community in any other state to have that same problem. But, as a whole, to make sure that whatever the approach is and whatever can be done to keep a balance on that, so that then, the schools are being treated equally, equitably, not equally, equitably, so that you have students getting what they need to perform the best they can. And then finally on page 5, beginning on page 5, at the end, it talks about the desired characteristics in a new superintendent. Nothing short of being able to walk on water would be the desire of any community. And I think, that is certainly something that people look forward to. This is going to have to be, the superintendent's going to have to be someone who's had some experience in dealing with urban education, obviously, in dealing with an extremely diverse community, in dealing with issues of poverty, in dealing with the issues that may come up from time to time in cities that don't occur in other places. That doesn't mean that people haven't had those experiences along the way. It may not have been their last experience, but they may have had it somewhere along the way. Maintaining a working relationship between this board, the school committee, and the community as a whole is going to have to be a strong attribute of the new superintendent. As I said before, no doubt there's politics in education. There is in every state. But by the same token, someone who knows how to balance those resources and knows how to take the right approaches with the various groups with whom they have to deal is extremely important. And then you can spread that out a little bit further to the philanthropic groups and also to the business community, because those are not without their stresses as well in terms of wanting to do programs and making sure there's a balanced attack to it. The new superintendent will have to look at the plans that have been put in place and not abandon them. On occasion, superintendents will walk into a new district and they'll say, I'm coming here and here's my agenda, I'm going to change everything. That won't work here because that's not the way the plan is laid out. Now, that doesn't mean a plan can't be tweaked, and that doesn't mean a plan can't be, looked on and more input gathered and maybe do something a little bit differently. But, the turnaround plan is here, the open architecture stress is here, So I think that, the person who comes in is going to have to understand how they've worked and what's going to happen. And then finally, I said, additionally, maintaining the partnerships is important, and garnering grant funding and all of that. You got to keep a close eye on that. As I said before, grants are absolutely the most beneficial thing that can help a school district. But by the same token, if you start to rely on them to carry you for long-term sustainability, it doesn't work. So you have to have kind of a flow in that, and there are people that are very good at that. And we put a paragraph in. We intend to meet that challenge of finding that someone for you. I would tell you unequivocally that finding someone who has absolutely every characteristic you want probably won't happen. But we will find somebody who's had meaningful experiences, and that will be beneficial for Lawrence. I, too, would like to thank the people. I know that I've had conversations with John Connolly and Ventura Rodriguez, but, Denise Snyder, I mean, I did speak with her today. I wanted to see her, and I understand she's a little under the weather, and I was sorry because I didn't get to see her. But what she did with the snow days, I mean, I've done a lot of snow days as a superintendent, and I got to tell you, she worked miracles in getting everything back on track. So, and laying out that schedule is not easy. So we felt very welcomed in being here, and I was proud to have the opportunity to meet with a few more people today that I'd only dealt with on the phone before. With that, we want to talk a little bit about the other sections of this. Well, what follows then is a list of the summary comments from the various focus group meetings. We are not going to talk about those in detail. You can see what people had to say. Hopefully when you read through those and you look at the strengths, the challenges, and you look at also the characteristics the groups or participants in the groups would like to see in a new superintendent, you'll see where those more summative narrative statements came from. And you'll see some detail that backs that up. Finally, on the last page, and now I got to find the last page, okay, page 34, we put together two pieces here. Number one, we said after doing all of this work, we would like to say that the school committee and the alliance have to find an experienced educational leader who possesses the following characteristics. And again, this is a summation of everything, and there are characteristics here. Administrative and teaching experience in building, and I'm going to read a couple of these, in building in a building-based budget environment, political savvy, excellent understanding of long and short-term budget planning, welcoming and transparent in developing a professional presence that signals accessibility and humility, and then understanding the ongoing necessity to build and maintain productive working relationship with the alliance that's focused on a strategic vision with common goals. Now, a lot of educational jargon in there, all right? A lot of things you've heard before, but the difference is you've got a plan that's in effect. So as you look for someone that has those characteristics, it's going to be their ability not only to be that kind of person, but to tweak what exists and bring some new thought to it. The other piece of it is, we say, now, in order to, having those characteristics is fine, but how have you demonstrated your work over a period of years? And, with regard to the leadership experiences and accomplishments, we say that the candidate will demonstrate certain things. And we use the word demonstrate for a reason. I know that, a lot of times when I read research, I'm absolutely enthralled with it. I think it's tremendous. I think it proves something. But then, when you put the plan into effect, how has it worked? How has it really worked? Research will support a lot of things, but sometimes it is the person who then puts that into effect and takes the practical look at it that really makes a determination of what works. So when we look for candidates, we want people to demonstrate that they have done this. Anybody can say they've done something, but demonstrating that they've done something is extremely important. So we're saying demonstrating experience and creating, working with a clear vision. Demonstrating excellence in building, supporting, and maintaining a strong working relationship with the community and the schools. Demonstrating community engagement. Demonstrating skills in developing building-based budgets. There's a lot of jargon around budget building, biggest ones are usually building-based, zero-based, and I'm sure we can all think of a few others. And some of that works, but how do you demonstrate that you've done that? And then working collaboratively with the Department of Education. That's extremely important since you're in a receivership situation, and you want to make sure that that partnership is one that's productive. And then demonstrating achievement results that meet, projected goals. This district has set some lofty goals, and some of them have been reached, and some of them you're on your way. And I think that's going to be extremely important to continue with that. And then finally, one that we kind of heard that, demonstrate an out-of-the-box mentality in solving system-level issues. A lot of people use the word out of the box in these groups. And I think, that's a good thing. Now, that has some cautions to it, but it certainly speaks well of the direction people felt the district should go. So that concludes my summation of the executive summary. I don't know if there are any questions about that. Yes.
So let me throw it to board members for questions, but let me just quickly just preface what I'd like to do now is have questions for the search firm that are specific to the process that's just taken place, the profile that's been developed, or questions relative to how they do their work, conduct their work. And I just preface this way in that what I'd like to do when we're done with that is I will outline my intended steps to take relative to process for hiring the superintendent from this point forward, and timeline. And I think, and I just say to ask questions on those other topics because those guys will not be able to answer questions on process and timeline. Those are questions I can answer. And, certainly willing to have discussion on it. I have a few questions for the board relative to process and timeline. But I just want to be clear as we go to question these guys, they're not going to be able to answer process and timeline questions. I'm happy to do it a different way if people want, but otherwise at this time, questions for the search firm. Jess?
So in reading the feedback from all of the various groups, it seems that a great number of people mentioned cultural competence as a characteristic they'd like to see in the next superintendent, and I'm just wondering why that didn't make it into the last summary page.
That is, it's certainly something we could include with that, and it's certainly something we're looking for. We'd be foolish not to, because it is an extremely, cultural competence is a lot different than just being exposed to diversity. And we hear, both of those arguments going out when we talk to other school districts. So that is something we could put, I would put that under the demonstrated piece. So we can edit that and include that in there. That's not an issue.
I think we'd like to see that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Not only as demonstrated, but I think also as a characteristic. I think it's important to put in both ways. I think you can demonstrate how you've led in a diverse setting and have a characteristic of being more culturally competent.
Okay.
The other things that I just want to say, I think that there's part of my concern of the exercise of what folks want to see in a superintendent was that, we're kind of going from a vision mode to a caretaker mode and kind of tweak around the edges. And I guess I would put it from we're not trying to hire a Picasso because we have this kind of framework of a painting that we want to get to. So part of the, and I didn't see anybody say that in this process, we want all these great things, but holding true to the turnaround plan, tweaking that document, because I know that's a document Desi talks about, and that we built as a community, that be an important part of it, and I'm not sure, I saw it a couple times in the beginning. Right. But that, sometimes in building these positions and characterizations, I think we create a unicorn, but that doesn't mean that we don't go trying to get that unicorn, but definitely just making sure that we're going to, at the end, have some trade-offs between the things that just, I'm not saying.
It doesn't need to be a pink unicorn, but just a unicorn.
Just a unicorn.
Yeah.
But let me be clear, we've been very fortunate, at least on the city side, we found a couple unicorns. We've been so they're out there. maybe I should change the term, because you're never going to find an
We're
actual
not going to
unicorn.
use unicorn.
But, you know, the conglomeration of all the desires and expectations is, you know, it gets you so hopeful. But I just want to make sure that we know that at some point we might do some trade-offs between left-handed and right-handed, you know, height and weight, as examples.
I think what happens, Mr. Mayor, is, you know, when you gather perceptions from a number of people, and when they say they'd like to even see, when you see some of the desires that they list, it's based on the successes that have happened.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks well. But certainly, you know, as recruiters, you know, we're well aware of the turnaround plan, and we're well aware of the open architecture strategy. So, you know, that's not something that's going to be lost when we speak to people.
And I don't want to give any candidate one leg up over another by saying to me, if I was part of that early process of interviewing, that them being well-versed in the turnaround plan, to me, would show you those characteristics as well, that they know that there's a turnaround plan out there that we built as a community. Sometimes I think we forget that was a document put together by a similar process that we just had for the superintendent characteristics, that the turnaround plan was something that was community-driven. But
And the first question we ask candidates, quite frankly, in any search is, what do you know about the place that you're applying for? Because, you know, we have, you know, a good friend of mine once called them the usual suspects who apply for every job, all right, across the country, quite frankly. And I think, you know, we ask, what in this case, what do you know about Lawrence? Because if you know nothing, that gives us some hints as to where you're going. It doesn't mean you can't regain some prowess there and figure that out, but you should have figured that out before you applied. This is a CEO. This is a superintendent. This isn't somebody right out of school with no experience.
thank you.
Other questions?
John?
Pat?
Just one question. I noticed that, and I haven't read them all, so maybe you can just enlighten me. There was a good number of students that were interviewed. What seemed to be the main theme that the kids felt the new superintendent should have? Did something come out? Was there something that was?
From the ones that I read, and I did not conduct those groups. Did you have student groups?
I had one student group, yes.
Okay, maybe I'll let Don answer that, and then I'll tell you
right.
what my perceptions was that I got from reading all the responses.
They talked about many things, but I think the thing that stood out most in my mind was they definitely wanted someone who was visible and someone who exhibited a care for them and was really invested in their education. Somebody who cared, somebody who recognized them, and present, somebody who they saw often.
And some of the results mentioned about, you know, maybe some programs, part of the issue is mostly we deal with high school kids, so they may not have been here when something was here and now it's not here, and they may have heard about it, and they may think that ought to be, you know, something that comes back in terms of programs or something like that. Usually that's their major concern, but, you know, we get the normal stuff, you know, cafeteria food needs to be better, and then we get the things where you see a great deal of wisdom in terms of, you know, we'd like to have some of the students who follow us have experiences maybe broader than we've had.
Okay, thank you.
Ventor?
Just a couple quick things. You know, on that point about students, there one of the documents, just skimming them now, the search survey results on page 5, just highlighting that, you know, different stakeholder groups in the survey were asked to rank per this question what they deem most important in selecting a superintendent, and the only item that had unanimous selection was understand and be sensitive to the needs of a diverse student population. So we could unpack what that means, but I think it sort of follows up with what Jess was saying, and I think that, be it here or somewhere else, I mean, I think cultural competence, absolutely, and I want us to also be okay to talk about race and talk about racial disparities and someone who understands the impact of education opportunities for historically marginalized groups, including, you know, let's talk about race. I just want to be okay doing that. And then a couple other quick things are, you know, when I look at the student responses on that survey, it's kind of interesting because nothing else really had unanimous selection, but one thing that the students chose that the other groups did not was integrate personalized educational opportunities into the instructional program. And just as typical here, I would lead with the students. I mean, I don't know, I feel like this response here, like, from their perspective, is critical about, you know, how do we move in an open architecture system, not only decentralization and autonomy for the school, but how does that actually get down to the classroom level and really in a personalized way for our students. So just highlighting that. And the other things I would just say quickly are, or maybe it's partly a question, I love seeing some of the responses and comments in English and Spanish. We did offer the survey in both languages, so really glad that we're able to get participants in both languages. Would love to think about how we share publicly, at minimum, the executive summary, and it's something that I would advocate that we translate and can, you know, offer myself or others to help do that, just because I think we asked for input, we got it, you know, and I'd love to be able to share it back to the community. Again, at minimum, the executive summary. I know there might be information otherwise, and I look to you all in terms of what is typically appropriate to share. Executive summary seems like,
The executive summary would usually be what's shared in a broader base, and I can also check with our home office, because we have translators, obviously, in several languages.
so we can work on
So
that.
we may be able to do it more quickly and not put a burden on someone else.
Great.
So
And
I'll
then
check
just
on
this
that.
notion of how we post it publicly, be it on the website or maybe borrowing from some of my colleagues who've developed the engagement, you know, policy. Maybe we can tap into some of that to disseminate this. So, but thank you for the work. Really thorough, and it's great to look forward to digging into it even more.
Can I just piggyback on that to say that I think the other thing that we should translate and post is this desired characteristics page, because I think that would be important for people to know in terms
Okay,
of the
so
transparency.
we'll take the first, what is it, the first 6 or 7, and then page 39.
Yes.
So we'll,
And mine it's
no.
page 34. But,
right,
this-
you're right.
right, okay, all right. And then I just also do want to say thank you to you guys, because I know that this was a tremendous amount of data to compile in a short period of time, so thank you for your efforts in doing that.
Thank you, and it's, you know, it's always a pleasure for us to find out more things about places we visit.
I just want to thank Ventura for helping me figure out how to read the chart on page 5.
And I'll just say,
What are they showing me?
in doing a number of focus groups in a number of different cities, I've never seen a translator or even 2 translators at every focus group. We've never had snacks, and there has never been daycare. So this community really went out of its way to make it doable for the community. So I commend you on that.
Any final comments or questions to the search firm? Appreciate it. I will just offer a few comments. I thank you for your hard work. I again thank the members of the board and the LPS team for working so hard, and Denise Snyder's shop for working so hard to pull it off. Again, I think it was a really thorough, robust process under great time constraints, and so everyone's to be commended. I would echo all the comments relative to the importance of a culturally competent superintendent as a priority, running an organization focused on high-impact family engagement and helping schools and school systems to implement high-impact family engagement. If you know family engagement, then you know that the core of it is about culturally competent practice and respecting all families and their right to have an equal voice in how schools are run. So I just want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues on that. I also just want to say that in my conversations with Dwight, I was always quick to point toward open architecture, which is the system that Superintendent Riley and his team and the community here in Lawrence have worked so hard over 6 years to implement. And, you know, I think of open architecture in the simplest form as putting the power at the school site level so that things like empowering families can happen. And, you know, that it is so important that the next superintendent not come in and clean sweep and just implement something totally different, but that the good parts of open architecture are expanded and the parts that need to change, because nothing is perfect, are changed for the better. All right, with that said, I thank you very much for your report. At this point, I want to outline some actions that I'm going to take as chair relative to the hiring process, and get feedback from the board on that. I will begin with well, you know what? I'll outline the whole process and throw one question out that I definitely have and solicit general feedback on that. So we are at this point roughly 2 weeks behind the original drafted schedule, which was loose, but was originally designed, with the idea of making sure that Lawrence would not fall behind the typical superintendent hiring timeline, or at least be able to compete within that structure, knowing that we were somewhat behind. We're roughly 2 weeks off that intended schedule, which was aggressive. I can say, so I want to bear that in mind as I outline this process. So what I would hope to do at this point, or what part of what I intend to do, but also want to get feedback which can inform it, is I will designate a hiring subcommittee of this board to be composed of myself, Ventura Rodriguez, and Julia Silvero. This hiring subcommittee will work with the search firm in the development of the slate of superintendent candidates who will be interviewed preliminarily by the hiring subcommittee. I would like the slate to be finalized by April 25th, which is roughly a week off the original intended date. At that point, we would then bring whatever that slate is, approximately 8 candidates, in for interviews with the hiring subcommittee. Per the briefing we received at the last meeting, I am partially opting for a hiring subcommittee, both for expedience, but also to ensure confidentiality of applicants to the greatest extent possible. And so they would be interviewed by the hiring subcommittee. I would hope to include a minimum of 3 non-voting members of that hiring subcommittee who have expertise in English language learning, students with special needs, and then running an urban school district. I would most likely look for experts outside of Lawrence to help in that process, with the intent being, again, trying to safeguard confidentiality to the utmost and to get the most impartial views possible in the room asking questions, and helping the members of the hiring subcommittee ensure that they are asking the right questions. We will obviously also ask the other members of the board and members of the community what questions they want to make sure are asked, though the work of the search firm has been very helpful in outlining the questions that should be asked of those candidates in that process. The intent would be that the interview of the slate, of the candidates in the slate, would take place during the week beginning April 30th, and if need be, extend into the following week. At that point, the hiring subcommittee would come together without the non-voting members, just the members of the hiring subcommittee, and they would determine which candidates would be advanced to a final round of interviews. I'm not going to designate a specific number within that. I would just leave that to the judgment of the hiring subcommittee as a whole. But the hope would be then that whichever candidates advance from the hiring subcommittee, that they then come before the full board in a board meeting for public interview. So that would take place, I assume, here or at whatever location is deemed appropriate for that public interview. At the public interview, I would hope to include a minimum of one parent and one student who would join the board in a non-voting capacity, but have the rights of and sort of the responsibilities that the board members would have in asking questions to the finalist candidates. I would also entertain any proposals as to who else may be included, but I will just say right off the bat, I'm not going to have 25 people up here interviewing. I want to make sure it's a process that really allows us to have a detailed interview from the members of the board and a few additional designees. And in this case, I want them to be exclusively Lawrence community members who will be able to ask those questions. I would entertain recommendations from the board as to who those people should be. That does not have to be determined tonight. But at that point, we would then complete the public interviews of the finalists, and the board would then convene. And let me say, I would like to see that take place ideally the week of May 14th. And I just say, as it has been the case this whole time, the timeline is subject to change, but we are getting to the point where we don't have much flexibility. And so the last piece on that would then be that the board would then convene following those public interviews to accept nominations for hiring the next superintendent, and it would then require a supermajority vote of this board or 5 votes to select that next superintendent. That is how I see the process playing out from here in outlining this plan. I am attempting to balance the absolute need to hear from the community and get full community input, and hopefully the need, and while also ensuring the need to ensure confidentiality for all applicants until at least that final round, and the need to be expedient and not lose any potential candidates as we close in on the end of the school year. So with that said, I will open this for comments from board members and get feedback from board members. And I will just say the one question that I do have, and this is to some extent a minor piece, but one that I would welcome feedback from the board in addition to comments on any other parts, is we also can, if we wish, select a date at which we don't want to receive any additional applications, or we can leave it open with no real final date in mind should a unicorn be found on May 13th. But I would welcome feedback from the board as to which way they want to go. So, okay, I'm done talking, at least momentarily, and I welcome comments from the board. Mayor Rivera.
Sorry, 2 things, just housekeeping. Can you run the dates for me one more time? I have 4/25 and 5/14, but
Yep.
I feel like this other one.
So I would like the hiring subcommittee working with the search firm to have finalized the slate by April 25th. We were originally intending that to be April 19th. I'd like to move it to April 25th. At that point, we'll know who we want to interview at the hiring subcommittee level, and we will conduct those interviews the following week, beginning April 30th, and if need be, into the first full week of May. At that point, the hiring subcommittee would then convene to vote on which candidates they wish to advance to the finals. to the final interview stage, which will be a public interview before the whole board, in which we will also have Lawrence community members designated who will join the board to ask questions of those candidates during those public interviews. We would hope for those public interviews to take place on the week of May 14th. At that point, depending on when those interviews take place, the board would then gather shortly thereafter, not the same day, I presume, because I think people will want to, reflect on the public interviews, and then the board will, though, convene for the purpose of accepting nominations for the next superintendent and voting, a supermajority of which is required to accept the candidate. So that would happen after that week of the May 14th, presumably shortly thereafter.
Okay. And then I forgot what my second comment was, but this is good. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments? Jess?
Okay, so I think some things are good about this, and then I have several concerns that I'd like to voice. So right now, as a group, our sole charge as a group is to hire the next superintendent and to lead that process well. And while I have absolutely no problem with the folks that you've chosen to be on the hiring subcommittee, I feel fairly strongly that that work of selecting the final candidates should be a full board activity. And I understand that there may be local candidates as well as national candidates in the mix, and there may be concern about relationships to juggle or so on, but I think that every one of us is on this board because we are fully committed to this process. We're also fully committed to the confidentiality of people who are applying, and we want the very best superintendent for Lawrence. So I do feel that the full board should be involved all through the process, unless if there's a member who wants to recuse themselves from that early part of the process, that is certainly within their right. But I do feel that the full board should be part of choosing those 8 finalists and talking to them, because that's our job for now. So that's one thing I want to say. I do want to say that I think it's a great idea to have a parent and a student on the interview committee. I would add just one more category to that, is I think a teacher should also be on it, because I think that this person's relationship with the teaching population is going to be extremely important to their success. So I think that that's great, but I guess the other reason that I think the full board should be involved in that semi-finalist selection is that I do feel otherwise, and how do I say, as someone, I wasn't born in Lawrence. I've lived here for 20 years, right? So I obviously feel like people who are not from the community have value to add to the community. But I think in that initial round, you're going to have one person from Lawrence and 5 people not from Lawrence, even if they're, and I think that those other people should be in the room. We want all of the expertise and input that we can get in that way. But I think that the other members of the board should also be engaged in that earlier part of the process.
Great. I appreciate those comments. I will offer some thoughts in response, but I would like to first gather any other comments from members of the board.
John, I want to agree with Jess as far as the teacher being on board.
Yep.
And that was going to be my comment. Most definitely, there should be an educator on the on that team. Thank you.
Great. Other comments, Ventura?
Just a quick question. And so when we get to the to the finalists, I guess I would love to talk about how to make that more of a robust interview day for the finalists, where you know, the interview with this board and perhaps invited members as part of it, but I could see a community meeting where people get to ask questions. I could see meetings with students, meetings with teachers, staff. I mean, you know, partners, similar to what we did to gather feedback. I actually would love, and having gone through a superintendent process where I had to do that, it was like a 12-hour day, it's just very helpful to also walk away with a better understanding. It's okay to read the information, but when you meet for 10 hours with members of the community and get a chance to talk to them, ask questions, you as a candidate, I think, walk away with a much better understanding, and I think it would open another opportunity for stakeholders to give feedback. And then the other thing I would recommend is the inclusion of a performance task in some capacity. So be it when they're presenting to us, that part of that presentation is a performance task where we say, you know, for example, let's assume you're entering and you come up with these issues, like what would be your plan? We tell them that ahead of time, and they're basically presenting to us, and we can engage in an exchange with them. I mean, it's not a perfect substitute for real life, but it actually gives us a little flavor of what it might be like to interact with this person and what kind of preparation they do, and, you know, things like that. So, yeah, those are two things I think would add overall to the process.
Great, I appreciate that. Other comments?
Those are great ideas, I think.
Yep.
This other piece about keeping the application process open, I guess I'd like to hear from the search firm. Is that something that would hinder? When we did searches that we left it open, people felt like if the pool was continuously people being put into the pool, that there was a lack of seriousness about the hiring process. On other searches that we've done for the city, it's why we're in the search committee, we're a search process for a chief. We put a date certain that it ended in. Is that something that would hurt the process? Is not? I mean, on this process, I've never done a superintendent search before myself, so.
We've done it both ways. When you leave it open, you again leave that opportunity for someone to come in later on who may have had either their own circumstances change where they've rethought about this and they want to apply for the position, and maybe they have not been looking before. That's one circumstance. On the other, when you close the date, you know, that's final. But I will tell you, for every time we closed the date, we had somebody roll in the next day or something. And, you know, there's nothing that says you can't make allowances for that. If there's a cutoff date, some people would tell you that's the measure of seriousness of the candidate, because they got the work done that they had to get done, you know, to apply for the position. So while we've done it both ways, it has not been problematic for us that I'm aware of. We have 150 associates nationwide. I'm sure someone will, you know, probably say that it may have been a problem, but we've not experienced that. My preference as a professional is to put a cutoff date, but, you know, because then I think, you know, we have some finality to it. But I would also leave the caveat that if we hear from one of our associates or something, we may want to include someone. There's nothing that says when you have a cutoff date you can't include someone later. It's just that when you're recruiting, it's different than just applying. And sometimes it takes a little longer for the recruits to get their material in, you know. So if you want a definitive answer, I think you should have a cutoff date.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that piece, because I was going to say, is there any legal issues that might come up?
Yeah, I would bet there is. You know, yeah, I mean, there would be. There could be. There's that
and we could fend those off if we have, you know, again, this concept that we find somebody who hits every one of our important profile characteristics. Yeah. It would be a shame to just say, hey, because you found out about it, you know, you were doing something with your family in Europe and you forgot something about it, or Mexico.
When we've had clues on people, and we have had already, so we've tried to reach out and get them to respond. If they don't respond typically with one email or one phone call, then we go back at it again. You know, we're not adverse to doing that 3 times, but once you hit 3 times and nobody responds, then you kind of don't go back. But usually, if you're going to have the cutoff date, I would back it right into the date the slate's presented, all right? Because that gives you as much flexibility as you can have then.
All right, thank you. So I would make the suggestion that we do have a date then, date certain, which is the slate date.
Other feedback, Pat?
I was just curious about the questions. Will we have feedback as far as preparing the questions in advance as to what we feel would be
Yeah.
appropriate at the time.
So I can say that hiring subcommittee will solicit questions from board members in addition to the broader community. I can just tell you in my prep work, I will reach out to organizations such as Mass Advocates for Children and ask for questions and pieces like that to make sure that we're covering all the bases. That's part of the reason why I also want to designate some non-voting members to ensure that we're incredibly thorough in that process. And I would also mention we'll examine and reflect deeply the materials that have been presented by the search firm via the community process in formulating the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Connolly,
Yep. Yes.
we have, obviously, we have banks of questions, but not just banks of questions. We break them down into various components. They're meant to be a structure from which you can develop the more personal aspect, be it curriculum or personnel or whatever it is. So we can let you have those, and then you tweak them along those lines from the information you might gather.
Great.
Appreciate that. Other comments or feedback? Okay, I have, I want to ask two questions before I just sort of offer final thoughts on that. My first questions would be to the search firm. Is the timeline that I have outlined, are there any major red flags? I will phrase that because you always have feedback on our timeline. Are there major red flags? Okay.
You'd be asking, what's a major red flag?
Yeah,
But
well.
No, I think, you know, now that you've, I did express some issues with the date remaining as it would be, given when we finish the focus group work. But I think now, I think we're okay with it. We're comfortable with that.
Great. I just would ask for a sort of informal poll of the board here. Would anyone be in favor of leaving the application date open throughout? And then I would ask, are people then favor setting a closed date, or if you just have no opinion, don't vote, but could you sort of an informal poll, would you prefer to see us set an end date for applications?
End
date, okay. Great. So what I just want to cover here in closing on just this portion and then get to the final part of the meeting. I want to thank you all for your thoughtful comments. I greatly appreciate them. I want to duly note the objection of Jess Anders to the formation of the subcommittee. And I want to, in regard to the others, say we will absolutely include a teacher in the final interview process. And I would all but ensure that in the hiring subcommittee process, one of the non-voting members with a specialty in ELL or SPED, at least one will be an experienced teacher. But as to the finals, we will definitely include a teacher. I'd also like to just reflect on the record that that was actually initially my idea, and pretend that I didn't miss that when I originally outlined the process. I also want to say we will absolutely do a broader community process around the final interviews, Ventura, and you can be prepared to assume responsibility for working with LPS and the members of the board to put that together. But I do think you're absolutely right. That is critical. Same with the performance task, and I do think that we will do work on the fine details of how we play this process out going forward. But just to be clear, because I don't want to seem like I'm avoiding it or whatever, I'm noting the objection relative to the appointment of the subcommittee, but I am under Article 2, Section 2.2 of the bylaws going to move forward with appointing the subcommittee, and we will work towards establishing that slate and moving forward. So With that said, I'd like to go to the final matter of business, which is establishing a recurring time for our meetings. So,
John, before
Yes.
you do that, can I
Jess, yep.
so I would then at the least like to work with Ventura on the community process around the final interview.
Yep.
If that, yeah.
absolutely. And I will designate you and Ventura as in charge of a subcommittee that will put together that process for the final interviews. And the two of you can co-chair that. I think we need a third member for a subcommittee, so do I have a third member? And nobody needs to volunteer because I'm more than happy to make Noemi the member of that subcommittee. But Pat, if you're willing, okay, that's great. You've saved Noemi, and I would like to strike from the record that I even entertained that. And we'll go with Pat, Jess, and Ventura for putting that piece together for the final interview round. Julia.
Yeah, just one, something occurred to me. We're involving one parent and for the final interviews, to interview the finalists. But if we're, what parent are we going to choose? Is it going to be a high school parent, an elementary school parent, or special needs parents? Or should we have one of each? And I know that you just said you don't want a whole group of people interviewing, but I just feel that those three items are important.
I'm willing to say that it doesn't need to be limited to 3, but I do think there is a number not too far from 3 where it can get unwieldy and actually detract from the process. I think in the broader process that Ventura and Jess and Pat will work on putting together, we will hear from many of those voices. I think we're also trying to make sure that we hear from all of these voices through the things we've done to this date and going forward, including with the work that the subcommittee will do. You know, I will solicit a ton of feedback in selecting the folks who will be up here in the final interview round. And we will work with LPS on doing that as well, and try to find people who, you know, have experienced as broad an experience as possible, and that we feel will offer great insight and help to the board. But we'll be very mindful of that as we select them.
Thank you. I just feel that because of the needs of those 3 different parents are very different, and they might have some issues and concerns that might be helpful to us as a committee, as a board.
Absolutely.
In our final decision. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I, John, can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
Have we thought at all about what the role, the search, you guys don't need to answer this. No. Go home to bed. I'm wondering what the role of the elected school committee is going to be in the interview process as well, and I don't know if that's been engaged or thought of at all. They did. I didn't even know they were here.
No, I'm not saying that.
Oh, the search guys. Yeah, they left. Yeah.
I think absolutely we will solicit questions from the elected school committee for both stages of the interview process. And I'm certainly open to ways that they can be included on that broader interview day for sure. So and I look to you as board members to come up with ideas on how we can do that with the elected school committee and the broader community. And would just say also at Mayor Rivera's recommendation, you know, I will be reaching out to the elected school committee shortly to begin discussions on them on how we can formalize arrangements going forward on all matters as we prepare to become receiver.
Great, thank you.
Great, all right, so last matter of business here. I think we want to set a recurring time for a monthly meeting. I think we can say, just given the work we have in front of us, that we know that the remainder of April and May will be a bit unorthodox schedule-wise, but if we can set a sort of recurring date, that would probably be great for predictability for the community, for the board members, and to get me out of this loop of herding cats. I believe the options that we put on the table was the notion of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, one of those days in the third or fourth week of the month, second and third. Thank you. I will just say generally I am open to anything broader if that's what works, but I think we need to come up with something like that, that we know we meet on the X day of the X week of the month. Do folks have anything they want to offer relative to availability on that generally? Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that the one date that we should stay away from is Tuesdays of any day of the month, because that's when the city council meets, and not that I'm at the city council meetings, but people in the audience are sometimes at the city council meeting. Things of note happen at the city council, so I don't want people to have that conflict. And then I'm not sure, we've also been very unorthodox in our scheduling for the school board. We've been kind of all over the map. I can't remember what was the regular scheduled meeting for the school board before the way we do it now. Second and fourth Thursdays?
It was a second.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So I would just say, for me, the third and last Wednesdays of the month are extremely difficult, because I have my own board and executive committees that meet on those days. So I could do the second Wednesday of the month or a different night of the week, but.
Are Mondays good for people?
I'm going to want to stay away from Mondays. That's sort of my one day that I can't necessarily be in Lawrence. And I also, I throw everything last minute at the poor LPS folks, and I would only be compounding it if I did it last minute on a Monday, I think. Other constraints?
What Wednesdays you can do?
I can do the second Wednesday, or the first Wednesday, but yeah.
Ventura, Pat, second Wednesday?
Second Wednesday.
And I'm presuming the 6 p.m. time, is that the preferred? Yep.
6 is good.
Okay, so we'll say going forward that LAE will meet on a regular basis on the second Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. I'm going to email tomorrow on that. Joan, that's a
Starting in July. No.
That is a great question. My concern, though, is just that we are going to be right in the thick of moving into final interviews on the second Wednesday in May, so I want to see where we're at relative to that, but you can presume that the second Wednesday of June, we will certainly be on that schedule going forward. So, and Joan, I want to thank you for all of your assistance over the past few weeks. The individual at DESE who was helping me, who was fantastic, dropped me like a hot potato, though, after 3 weeks, and I appreciate you sticking with me. I'll let her know. Yeah, thanks. She was awesome. I don't blame her. I drove her nuts. We'll see how long Joan makes it with me, and I appreciate it, Joan.
Maybe we can get the new DESE commissioner get her back on your end.
Yeah. Anything else from the board? Okay, I just want to mention also, finally, in closing on that, that will be our regularly appointed meeting. The board can, under the bylaws, have special meetings with appropriate notice. We will probably have to do that in May to finish this process and hire, hopefully, the next great superintendent for Lawrence. With that, I want to thank all the folks here who are helping to put this on tonight. I want to thank both Daves, who helped me maneuver the building and get these meetings going, Joan, Dr. Bergeron, all the folks at LPS, all the members of the board, folks in the community. Thank you for all your help and all your input, and we look forward to moving this process forward. With that, we are adjourned.